Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome to another League of Legends guide. Today we are covering Jungle Shyvana.
They are nothing before me.
Shyvana is a jungler with great mobility that scales well and does great damage at all stages of the game. She has some very nice AoE damage which gets her through the jungle really quickly and can be devastating in teamfights. She's then also a mana-less jungler, which is awesome. I love not having to worry about my mana, and you can give your mid laner blue all day long. You're then even able to split push in that mid and late game. You can delete minion waves really quickly and take towers down very fast as well. You then even get some built-in tankiness from your passive, which is great because generally I do like to go for a Blood Razor jungler item, and this passive will make it so I'm not incredibly squishy. Now for our cons, we unfortunately have no CC at all in our kit, which is why I like to go for a Frozen Mallet, so I do have at least a slow available. Now this is also part of the reason that we have very mediocre ganks, especially before we're level 6. At level 6, at least we're able to jump in and knock back targets, but yet again, we have no crowd controls or slows. These things together is why we are so kiteable. Sure, we do have movement speed from our W, but if we're not able to hit enemies, then the duration is going to be rather short. All in all, you are pretty good in the mid and late game since you do scale so well, but you are pretty susceptible in that early game. For my Masteries, I like to go 12 Ferocity and 18 Resolve, grabbing Strength of the Ages as my keystone mastery. You could also go for Fervor of Battle instead if you did prefer, but generally I do like some increased tankiness on Strength of the Ages as I do go for a high damage build early on. For my runes, I like to go 9 attack damage reds, 9 armor yellows, 9 scaling magic resist blues, and 3 attack speed quints. Now you do also have the option of going for 9 marks of attack speed. Both attack damage and attack speed work great on Shyvana. For our summoner spells, Smite is a must grab. It will let you clear through the jungle, help secure Dragon and Baron, and allow you to buy your Blood Razor jungle item. For our second summoner spell, I generally like to stick with Flash, but it's not a requirement on Shyvana. Flash is of course a great escape, but you also have your Dragon form, so you can hop over walls. It is also great used offensively, because it can close a gap on a target. Now Exhaust is a really good second summoner spell if you are looking for increased dueling and gank potential. With Exhaust you will bring a lot more to a team fight since you can shut down an opponent's damage. Now until you have a Frozen Mallet, if you are even going for one, you will have absolutely no way of slowing, so Exhaust is a great way to stick onto a target. Of course you will have Chilling Smite, but that's not the greatest thing in the world either. So now let's look at those abilities, starting with your passive, Dragonborn. So, very simply, Shyvana gains between 5 and 20 bonus armor and magic resist, and it is doubled for between 20 and 40 during the effects of Dragon's Descent, which of course is that Dragon form ultimate. So there's not too much you can say about this passive. It is nice because you do gain some tanky stats in the early game, and it does scale into the late game as well. It's really nice because generally I like to get a Blood Razor and then follow it up with either a Titanic Hydra or Blade of the Ruined King, and all these things have something in common: a lack of magic resist and armor. This passive will just supply you with some nice armor and magic resist, so you're a little bit tanky at least in that early game. So now let's look at that Q, Twin Bite. Shyvana's next basic attack strikes twice in one swift movement, dealing bonus physical damage and triggering on-hit effects with each strike. When it's used in Dragon form, Twin Bite damages all enemies in front of Shyvana in addition to her primary target, triggering on-hit effects and granting Fury twice on each enemy hit. Shyvana's basic attacks against non-structures reduce Twin Bite's cooldown by 0.5 seconds, and Twin Bite resets Shyvana's auto-attack timer. So this is a great ability because it does have a really good AD ratio and can do some really solid damage when in Dragon form to an entire team. It's then even really good single target damage when we're not even in Dragon form. Now although it does have a scaling AD ratio, it's not as good as our W, so we have to max this one second. So now let's look at that W, Burnout. Shyvana surrounds herself in flame for 3 seconds, gaining bonus movement speed that decays each second. Shyvana's basic attacks extend the duration of the effect by 1 second on hit, up to a maximum duration of 7 seconds. Shyvana deals magic damage every second, and 25% of that damage on every hit to enemies surrounding her. Monsters take 20% increased damage. So, finally, when used in Dragon form, Shyvana also scorches the earth where she walks, leaving a trail of fire for 5 seconds that continually deals the same magic damage per second to enemies that pass over it. So this ability yet again is some more AoE damage for Shyvana, and it lasts for 7 seconds. It easily cleans up jungle camps and gives us some bonus movement speed for our ganks, so we max this ability first. So let's look at that last basic ability, our E, Flame Breath, and what kind of dragon would Shyvana be without being able to shoot flame. But anyways, when used, Shyvana unleashes a fireball that travels in a line, dealing magic damage to all enemies it passes through and marking them for 5 seconds. If it's used in dragon form, the difference is it will mark all units in a cone in front of Shyvana instead. So your basic attacks against these marked enemies will deal 2.5% of their maximum health as bonus magic damage. So this ability is nice because it is from range, but unfortunately it is an AP ratio. It can, however, still be pretty nice because 2.5% of the target's maximum health as bonus damage is pretty decent, but it's not as good as our Q and W, so save this one for last. So let's look at that ultimate, Dragon's Descent. When in human form, Shyvana passively generates Fury every second. In both forms, her basic attacks also each generate 2 Fury. When activated, Shyvana transforms into a dragon and dashes to the target location, carrying all enemies she runs through towards her destination and dealing them magic damage. While in dragon form, Shyvana gains bonus attack range, her abilities are empowered like we have talked about before, and her Fury decays at a rate of 5 per second. Once her Fury is depleted, she returns back to human form. This ability doesn't have a cooldown or initial cost, but can only be activated when Shyvana has 100 Fury. So this ultimate is of course really strong because this actually gives you a way to close a gap on a target, and your abilities do get a bit better as well. Since this ability does carry enemies with you, it's great when you are ganking from behind to push them into your team for a much more successful gank. Other than that, not too much else to say. Whenever you are fighting, generally you want to try to be in dragon form, and you usually want to push them into your team as well. For our skill order, we want to put a point into our ultimate whenever we can at 6, 11, and 16. Then we focus on maxing our W for its really strong AoE damage and movement speed. We then follow up by maxing our Q since the AD ratio does scale, and finally, since our E is AP based, we max it last. For my jungle route, I usually like to do a full clear and get as much XP as I can. Shyvana has pretty weak ganks until she's level 6, so I try to rush it as fast as possible. She's then a very good counter jungler, so if you are against a very weak early game jungler, you always have the option of going into the enemy jungle and stealing camps as well. Now, although your early ganks are weak, you do still make a pretty solid counter ganker, so try to keep track of where the enemy jungler is, and if you think he's going to gank a lane, wait for your opportunity and counter gank. Don't waste too much time, however, because you do need level 6. So your early ganks are bad because you have no CC, no gap closer until level 6, you're melee, and you are rather squishy early on. The reason you do make a good counter ganker though is because your burnout will deal a ton of damage if you can keep it on the enemy, and it's a lot easier to do if you are coming in from behind on a ganked lane. Generally though, you'll want to wait until you're level 6 and have Dragon's Descent before you start ganking. Not only does this give you a gap closer, but it also buffs your abilities, making them much stronger. As previously stated, try to sweep in from behind and knock them towards your team with your Dragon's Descent. This can make your ganks a lot more effective. Shyvana is a champion who excels in 1v1 and 2v2 fights, but she can still make a pretty decent team fighter. She can deal a ton of AoE damage in a team fight, but she's not a true tank. She can build very tanky and be somewhat hard to take down, but that's not where her strength lies, it's in her AoE damage. You don't really want to be a pure tank, you want to be more of a bruiser. Now generally you don't usually want to go all in with your Dragon's Descent to initiate. Usually you'll just end up dying unless you have a lot of follow-up CC from your team. Usually you'll want to play the role of more of like a frontliner and peel for your carries if somebody engages. Now while this is happening, you want to look for your opportunity to get onto the back line after the fight has already started to help deal with their carries. Flanking is of course a great way to accomplish this if you're not at the team fight already. Now for some hard matchups, and all these hard matchups here have something in common, a very strong early game. Now Nidalee is the queen of the early game and is able to put so much pressure on your team before you're even relevant. Her clear is pretty much as good as yours, but she brings way better ganks. Now in that mid and late game, generally you're going to be a better team fighter, but you of course have to get to that point in the game. Now Olaf is another strong early game jungler, which will yet again put a lot of pressure on your team while you try to rush 6. Fortunately for you, his ganks aren't as fast as Nidalee's, and you want to look for opportunities to counter gank him. Yet again, you will be stronger in the later stages of the game, so just try to make it there. Third here is Elise, yet again another really strong early game jungler that you can't really fight until the later stages of the game. She is somewhat weak against your counter ganks though, so look for opportunities to flank her when she goes in for a gank. Farm as much as you can, and make it to the late game. Now let's kick off our second set of hard matchups with Rek'Sai. Now she is like the previous 3 matchups, she has very good early game and will pressure your team while you try to become relevant yet again. Unfortunately, she's also able to void your counter ganks by using her Void Rush to go to a lane that you're far away from. Just remember one thing, you can win the late game. Then there is Evelyn, and guess what? Yet again, good early game ganks, and she can take control of the game while you work on farming. Her downside though is that she's very weak early on in 1v1 fights, so try to find her in the jungle and kick her ass. You'll also want to try to keep track of her with a vision ward. Last here is Jax, and he's hard for an entirely different reason. His early game isn't crazy, but instead, his late game is. He is able to be counter jungled and counter ganked though. He's weak to the counter ganks after he has used his stun. Take Exhaust as your summoner to stop some of his damage, and you want to push him off your team with Dragon's Descent when you are in a team fight. So let's finish this thing off with our item build, which starts with a Hunter's Machete, Refillable Potion, and Warding Totem. Now, we have two different core builds here. We have our carry core build, which involves our Blood Razor, Blade of the Ruined King, and a Frozen Mallet, and we have our tanky core, which is yet again a Blood Razor, Titanic Hydra, and a Dead Man's Plate. With your carry core build, you will be doing an absolute ton of damage with all of that attack speed and on-hit damage, and you'll be able to stick to targets with that Frozen Mallet. With the tanky core build, you'll instead be a lot tankier as you will have a really high health pool from the Dead Man's Plate and, of course, the Titanic Hydra, and you'll also have some armor. Now, of course, you could take Cinder Hulk as well, but I am just not a fan of that item on Shyvana. I really prefer having the Blood Razor, even if I'm a tank. For our boot options, we have Merc Treads against high CC and AP, Ninja Tabis against high AD, and Boots of Swiftness if we just want full-on mobility. As always, if we want some magic resist, we could get the Spirit Visage and the Banshee's Veil, and our armor options on Shyvana would be the Randuins if we're against high crits, and of course Thornmail against full AD teams. If we want a mix of both, we can get either the Guardian Angel to come back to life in that late game, or the ZZ Rot Portal to add some split push. For damage options, we first have the Wit's End, which is one of my favorite items on Shyvana since it does do on hit, takes off some magic resist, and just has a lot of attack speed. Of course, that's not to mention the fact that it also gives some magic resist. It works really well when combined with our Blood Razor and Blade of the Ruined King. Since your abilities don't have the longest cooldowns out there, Trinity Force is a pretty good pickup as well and can add some nice damage. Sterak's Gauge is then a great way to add some attack damage and have a shield for when you drop low, and the Black Cleaver is great if you need to take some armor off the enemy team. So for our carry full build, we take our core, then we add that Wit's End to add some more damage, and the Guardian Angel so we can come back to life. We'll deal an absolute ton of damage and be a little bit tanky in the process, but you only usually want to go for this build if you do need some damage. Don't go for this build if you have absolutely no tanks, unless of course you're snowballing super hard. For our tanky full build, we take that tanky core build, then add the Spirit Visage and a Sterak's Gauge just so we can add a little bit more damage, yet have some nice tankiness. If your team is lacking a tanky support or top laner, then I would recommend going for a build like this. Shyvana is, however, one of those tanky bruisers that can go for a very wide variety of items, so it's kinda just up to you to explore and find the items that you like for your playstyle. So that officially covers everything I've got on Jungle Shyvana. I would like to thank you guys a ton for watching the guide, and if you guys did enjoy it, you could always like or subscribe. You can find more of our content on my website, egamingtv.com, and also find me on Twitter at egaming_TV, which is where I do Riot Point giveaways at the end of every month. I'm also going to start using my Instagram a lot more, so that will be in the description as well, but it's simply egtv.dan. But anyways, thank you guys a ton for watching again, and I will see you guys in the next Champion Guide. Peace!
Mama told me this life ain't what it seems. Only two things, pick between. You can either chase a dollar or chase a dream. It's hard to choose when you're stuck between. I just hope I make it